he's included are made in the next 4 years. Jimmy Carter started the tradition with Mondale of bringing him into the Oval Office and giving him an office in the White House and consulting with him regularly. And that's been more or less true, but I think it'll be interesting to see. Donald Trump is such a dominant leader, and J.D. Vance has so little experience, relatively speaking. It'll be interesting to see how much he's included and what task he's given, by the president, or if he'll be less of an authority than in the past. So very interesting questions to come.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, Jim, because, talking about the role of the vice president during former President Jimmy Carter's funeral, we were hearing the words of the late former Vice President Mondale, and talking about the reason why he accepted was because he wanted the role of the vice president to be one that was respected, one that was more equal than in years past. And it is going to be interesting to see what that dynamic is like and what role J.D. Vance will play as we continue to take a look outside of Blair House. We are expecting President-elect Trump to depart momentarily. And on the lower right-hand side of your screen, that is an aerial view from inside the Capitol Rotunda, just a stunning view as we take a look. And previously, there were some singers. It does look like perhaps the ceremony, that portion of it has concluded, as we do see people exit right there. But just sharing with our viewers the different vantage points as we continue to watch in real time the events unfold. But it is absolutely interesting to see the very beginning, almost, Jim and Andrew, of what is to come in the next 4 years, setting the stage for what is likely to be a very different presidency. And you were mentioning the dynamic and the role, couching that in historical context with previous dynamics and relationships between former presidents and their vice presidents. Andrew, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what unfolds. Are you going to be flying, or Biden's going to be flying?
That's so true. I just have to note, we do see Marine One there in front of the Capitol. That's always a very, very cool shot there. Maybe we could take that full. You see the presidential helicopter there in front of the U.S. Capitol. And so we'll see who gets on that. I believe it will take the Bidens away, and then it will also take the Trumps to the White House. But my producers can correct me if I'm wrong on that front. Can we take the shot of Blair House? While we have Jim, can we just talk about the significance of Blair House? From my understanding, it's kind of like the country's guest room, so to speak. What do we know about it?
Yeah. What we know is that during the Second World War, when Winston Churchill came to the United States and stayed for weeks on end in the White House with Franklin Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt was not very happy about that. And eventually she said to him, why don't we have Blair House, which had been there, become kind of our guest house for dignitaries who come, rather than having them stay in the White House. There are these hilarious stories of Winston Churchill walking around the White House in the middle of the night. And there's one very famous story of him standing up naked in a bathtub that he was in, saying the Prime Minister of England has nothing to hide from the President of the United States. It was just, it was a real annoyance to Eleanor Roosevelt. So Blair House became kind of this very famous place for distinguished guests to stay. But during Truman's time, the White House was literally falling apart. And so they went in. You ought to see some of the pictures of this. They gutted the White House during Truman's administration, and he lived across the street in Blair House during that time. So it became kind of the White House itself. Then they recreated the White House to what it is now. But it was literally, they were worried that it was going to collapse because it had been so weakened over time. And during that time when Truman was in the Blair House, there was a Puerto Rican nationalist uprising at the time. There were several of the Puerto Rican nationalists who got guns, came to Blair House to try to assassinate Truman. They got as far as the guards in front of Blair House. Truman was actually taking a nap inside. Several of the guards were killed. The nationalists were killed. It was a really traumatic incident at that time. But the Blair House goes way back. I mean, the people who stayed there and came over to see Lincoln when he was in the White House is interesting. But it really became what you talked about, Andrew. A kind of let's have our visitors stay in the Blair House as opposed to having them stay in the White House.
And as we talk about the Blair House, we are still waiting for President-elect Donald Trump to depart. But this is a live look there at the Capitol, where we were seeing his daughter, Ivanka Trump, arrive along with a number of other family members right there. This is a live look as they already are starting to trickle in inside the Capitol. You see Eric Trump right there as well, walking inside, of course, awaiting for President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance to arrive. But another, historical moment in the making, Jim and Andrew, as this is really just the second time that the swearing-in ceremony is taking place inside at the Capitol Rotunda because of the weather, the incredibly cold weather. But what's also interesting to note is that there have been very cold swearing-in ceremonies that have taken place outdoor. And Jim, historically, when we're taking a look at the decision-making process when it comes to whether or not to hold an inauguration, traditionally outside or now shifting inside, what is the thought process historically when it comes to determining, the events and where they take place?
Good question. Very good question. It gives us a chance to talk about this building, too, a little bit. When the Capitol was built, the very first building was the Senate building, which is just to the right of the big dome right there. That was the original structure that was built. And then they began to build the middle part that will be the rotunda. The original rotunda had a cap to it that was much, much smaller than the one you see. In fact, the one you see was built during the time of Abraham Lincoln. You can see pictures of it being constructed during one of his inaugurals. So they built that, and then the house was built on the other side. And then eventually they expanded the two wings, so where the Senate is now is further out, where the House is now is further out. But so in that context, these inaugurations took place in various stages and in various places. The Senate building was originally used, as was the House chamber, for the very first presidents. The first time it went outside was Andrew Jackson, and they used the east portico, not the west. The west portico is where it's been done since Ronald Reagan switched it from the east to the west, where you look down the mall and that beautiful setting that you've shown pictures of. It always, prior to that, was on the east side, and the east side is where you see those famous pictures of Lincoln when he's giving his second inaugural are on the east side. What's interesting is once they built this huge dome on top of the structure, it really made the pillars that were in front of the east look very small and out of place. So there was a project to redo that, and they took those pillars down. They took that facade down. And if you're in Washington and want to have some fun, those pillars are all in the National, I think, Arboretum, standing like, if you went to Rome and saw ruins and so forth. Those pillars are out there, and they were replaced by new pillars and a new facade. So the facade you see with Lincoln is not the same facade where he spoke. It became much bigger and elaborate. And each president, made a decision about whether to go forward with, the exterior inauguration. When Grant was inaugurated, I think it was for his second time, it was extremely cold. It was like 16 degrees, and he went out, nevertheless gave his inauguration outside, but he held his inaugural ball in a room in the Treasury building where it was so cold people were wearing overcoats and the champagne froze. So kind of a famous time there. But being the Civil War general that he was not going to take it back inside. He held it outside. And then, of course, with Reagan, it was important because by the time you get, to Trump and to Reagan and so forth, you have so many people who show up and who are in danger of having frostbite, or really some bad things can happen in situation that sort of weather. So I think it was a wise choice to move it inside, just like as it was with President Reagan. But over time, it has been, JFK, it was about the same temperature that it is right now, 22 degrees. He went ahead with it outside. And I think the better idea is to hold it inside, and then, to not have people get injured or hurt during an inauguration.
Is that who it is? Let's find out. Who's going to walk out that door?
Yeah, we're just looking at some of the arrivals yet again. Maybe we can listen to some of them here.
Who's that? I don't know any of these people.
Jim, as we take a live look at the arrivals here inside the Capitol Rotunda, I want to ask you this, and maybe you know and maybe you don't, but we are awaiting President-elect Donald Trump to depart the Blair House and make his way here. What's the process during this waiting period? What is he doing? Is he practicing his speech? Is he just relaxing? I mean, what does he do during this downtime? Or is he busy making phone calls, as we do know that, he's set to sign, 200 or so executive orders? Can you take us perhaps inside the Blair House as we do await his arrival here?
Well, I doubt he's practiced. I bet he's read over his speech many times, and he's pretty good at reading speeches. And I think he will, he has good delivery. He knows how to give a speech. My guess is he's talking to a lot of different people and getting ready to come over. It's interesting in our history how this, presidents getting to the Capitol to be sworn in. The first inauguration was in New York, at a place called Federal Hall, but Washington came all the way from Mount Vernon and rode horseback and through carriages through various cities all the way, and had all this big celebration of him coming to, to that ceremony. He gets to the ceremony. They go to give him the inauguration, and nobody had remembered to bring a Bible. They had to run and get one from a Masonic temple that he used, and that many presidents have used since because of its historic significance. He then walked over to church himself. And then when you had Thomas Jefferson, he left his hotel where he was in Washington and walked to his inaugural, the first one, and then walked back to the hotel following that inaugural. So that was kind of a important point. Later in his second inaugural, he rode a horse to Congress to be sworn in. That then followed with various presidents getting there by various means. I think the first to go in a car might have been McKinley. No, not McKinley. It would have been Harding. Subsequently, this tradition developed where once the president was done with the inauguration, then you would have a parade that followed on. And those parades became more and more elaborate. Eisenhower's lasted for 4.5 hours. It was the longest. Wilson's had 40,000 people marching in it. It was the most people marching in a parade. So that became kind of the tradition of the president going back. And as you know, Carter, when he left his inauguration, was being driven back to the White House when he stopped the car, got out, and started to walk. And that became extremely famous. And I think everybody has followed that, where they walk a portion of the time on the way back to the White House. Trump did it and Biden did it. It has become kind of a tradition. It'll be interesting to see it in the cold weather whether they'll follow that pattern or not. I wouldn't, frankly, for security and other reasons. But, this getting to there and then leaving ended up resulting in the parade that we have, because the early presidents were followed by their enthusiastic supporters back to the White House. Andrew Jackson had such enthusiastic supporters that they came back to the White House and ransacked it. I mean, they went in, punch bowls were thrown everywhere, curtains were torn down, people had to escape through windows. It was just a scene. A joyous scene, but eventually the way they got everyone out of the White House was to take these big punch bowls outside and get the people to leave the White House.
And Jim,
So
I just wanted to pause as President-elect Donald Trump has now arrived at the White House. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden welcoming Trump and Melania Trump right there. I am going to raise the audio again. We might not be able to hear much, but let's listen in.
Are they not gonna go inside? Can Fox not go inside? Because literally they haven't been showing me shit. Just this shit.
Ivanka Trump.
This fastest.
Yes.
Okay, no.
And President-elect Trump standing there, apparently seeming to have a conversation of some sort. And it's just so interesting to see the interactions, as always, as it was a very contentious, battle almost between the two before President Biden announcing that he would step down and step away from running once again for president. But
I want to see the inside. Like, why are you guys showing the outside? No one wants to see the
that will take the
outside.
Bidens over.
We want to see the inside of this shit.
C-SPAN for today's events. Again, the House of Representatives coming in.
Wrong one. I was on this one. Yeah, this is boring. I ain't gonna lie. I can see why ain't no one coming to watch this, because there's nothing going on, at least at the moment.
Today for buses are so Obama will be there from glad they aren't when you think about the leaders there. Yeah, apparently for it is that they're doing it fun, right? But it's fun. What is super chat when
Okay, we'll do this. Alright, yeah, this is boring. I'm in the stream. I mean, there's other people streaming this shit, but I can't sit here and not talk, because there ain't no one to talk to in the chat right now, so. This is what being a small tuber sucks about. See y'all later.